Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my May 2026 reading wrap-up. Of a sort anyway, because May was a crazy reading month for me. I had a lot of reading to get through for the BookTube Prize quarterfinals, and I also did a readathon, the Maybe Midrash readathon, and I'm not going to talk about either of those in this video, and yet I still have 5 additional books to talk about, so what do you know? But anyway, I've actually talked about 3 of these books previously in my AM reading videos throughout May, but I'll just briefly go through them again, and then I have 2 additional books that I haven't talked about at all. So the first book I'm going to hold up is GITEL'S Freedom by Iris Mitlin, which I read as my April page 112 tag. I am a little behind on that as well. This is historical fiction. It follows GITEL, who is a Belarusian young girl whose parents take her over to America because they're Jewish, and there's, increasing violence in, the Pale of Settlement. So they go to the U.S., and actually her father goes first and is able to really get a nice little nest egg going so that, they have a decent amount of economic security. But then all of that kind of falls apart when GITEL is getting ready to get married. She and her husband Shmuel do have a little bit of a nest egg to put into a pharmacy, their own pharmacy, but then they lose that capital during the Great Depression. And for the rest of their lives, they're struggling financially. And it's also compounded by the fact that Shmuel has a variety of bad luck and childhood illnesses and things that rack his health. So that even when they, for the next several decades, get a little bit of a foothold, something might happen with his health that sets them back again. And then also they do have 2 daughters who actually have a significant age gap between them, so that it's like they have to kind of start over with caretaking a child again, as their first daughter is about to leave the nest as it is. So that's what GITEL is going through. And the through line is, what is her freedom? Her freedom would be the chance to actually go to school and have a life of her own, which is kind of what she wanted when she was thinking about marriage, but, it wasn't the socially acceptable thing at the time. And, there was hope with Shmuel that, they shared some political beliefs, and there was some, good parts of their marriage, but obviously most of her life is given over to both domestic and economic caretaking, and the question of when she gets her freedom is when, she doesn't have to caretake people as much. It's an interesting premise, but unfortunately the book was pretty poorly written, frankly. This is a She Writes Press book. It's a well-known indie publisher, self-publisher imprint. I go up and down with these books, and this book, unfortunately, it just was chock full of just long stretches of dialogue without any scene setting. Most of the scene setting is done with long chunks of interior monologue that just feel very clunky and unrealistic. And I actually listened to this on audio, and I gotta say the audio sounded kind of AI-ish, and there were some mistakes in the narration that were kept in the file. So this was not my favorite reading experience. I mean, I think there was promise in the, the idea for the story, but unfortunately it was not well executed. Next, I read The Wilderness by Angela Flournoy. This was one of my anticipated 2025 releases. I kind of decided last minute, that I heard about it being released last year, and I wanted to give it a go. I really liked Flournoy's first novel, The Turner House, so I'll link to my review down below. But unfortunately, this one didn't do as much for me, but we are following a group of African-American female friends for 20 years, throughout their 20s to their 40s. Desiree is kind of our main character. She's the first person we start with, where in her 20s she is leading her grandfather across the ocean to do a legal assisted suicide, but actually he dies en route. And it kind of causes a schism between her and her sister, and there's a lot of backstory with the fact that their grandparents raised them and their parents weren't there. But then we go back to America, and Desiree is with her friends, and we get to meet them a little bit, their relationships, romantic and platonic, their career aspirations, all of that. And then it takes a dip as the years go on into being increasingly political, that in fact the climax of this story is a tragic event that's very much tied to, you know, American politics and resistance culture. And I just felt like the tone was just a little too jolty for me. We were also head hopping a lot between the characters, going back and forth in time, and frankly, I just didn't really fall much for these characters and their stories. It just was a bit too disjointed for me. You know, the writing was fine, but you know, it just, again, in a different way, the execution was a little bit off. Things took a very big step up for me in the right direction with Heart of a Stranger by Angela Buchdahl, which is her memoir. Angela Buchdahl is a famous rabbi in the U.S. She is also the first ordained Asian American rabbi. This book, you know, I had this inkling at the beginning of the year. I wanted to read some Jewish memoirs. It wasn't on my TBR to-do list, gasp, but I did it anyway, and I was on the holds list at the library for a while before this book came in, and I decided I was just going to give it a go and forget, you know, my plans for the TBR, and you know, it was a good thing for me because I really liked this book. It's just a really thoughtful book where Buchdahl goes through her past biography, and then she teaches Torah, is a way that we might say it in Judaism, where she takes Hebrew words and extrapolates on biblical themes that have to do with the parts of her biography. She has a really intriguing backstory. She is of she's of an interfaith family. She was born in Korea. Her mother is Korean. Her father was Jewish, is Jewish, and then they ultimately left Korea when she was relatively young because they were concerned that mixed-race children would face hardships. So they settled in Tacoma, Washington, and into a Reformed Jewish community there that her father's family had been involved with for a while, and now Angela and her sister were involved with. And it was somewhat the same thing where there were barriers. There were racial barriers because of perception about, you know, Judaism in this country. And also there was a barrier about patrilineal descent because in Jewish halacha and Jewish law, traditionally, you're only Jewish if your mother is Jewish, and her mother never converted. But Angela was definitely raised Jewish. She got more and more involved in the community. She felt this kinship with singing, and it took her through youth groups and ultimately to cantorial school and then to rabbinic school. And so we follow her career until she actually now is the senior rabbi of a very prominent congregation. And so she's very well known beyond her circle. And in fact, that's touched aspects of her life as well, as she went into some broader themes about things that impact the Jewish community and other communities. But she talks about, you know, her response to October 7th and to COVID and to other things like that. So I found this really moving. She, you know, arguably you could say that, you know, her uniqueness, you know, brought her a little bit of attention, but, you know, her clout is here. You know, she has, I'm trying to think of the right vernacular, but basically she is a deeply thoughtful person who has earned her place. I think that's a major reason why Jews and non-Jews have flocked to her teachings, and as she's grappling with straddling different realities, as many of us do, I do within the Jewish community and other communities as well. So I'm really grateful to have read this. On to the books I haven't talked about yet, and what do you know, I am at very limited battery, so alas, but this is We Are Gathered by Jamie Weisman. This is part of my top of the Goodreads resolutions, whereas this book has been on my Goodreads TBR for so long, it's made it to the top of the list, and I have this yearly resolution to skim those titles, you know, off the top. So this is another sort of ruminative novel about a wedding, but we're only in the heads of various members of the wedding, well, the guests, and we're just hopping between them, and they're very like insular, self-absorbed ruminations on life, which actually have very little to do with the wedding, except that they're, you know, physically that's where they are, and they're sort of commenting a little bit on the action of the wedding, but we never actually hear directly from the bride or the groom. So it's the sort of thing that I think it's a high bar of entry. There's not a lot of plot that happens, and the actual focus of the novel isn't what's actually what they're gathered to do. But I liked it more than I thought I would. I thought that the writing was pretty intriguing. I enjoyed most of the characters. I thought there was a theme with most of the characters about people who had some sort of experience that really took them out of anything that is normal, I guess I'll say. We have veterans of war who went through, horrible things in war. We had a Holocaust survivor. We had a man who had suffered a stroke, and he was actually the grandfather of the bride. And, to the rest of the world, he looks completely invalid, except that we're in his head, and we know that mentally he's all the way there. And so it's fascinating to see how, people are treating him differently now. And we have another younger man who was on a great track to become a doctor, but then he suffered a mental impairment, and so now he's in his 30s and is living at home and kind of has no options. So I thought the characters were intriguing, but another strike against them for a lot of readers would be that they're almost all very or somewhat unlikable. And even I have to think that by the end of it, there were so many dickish characters that I was kind of falling out of it too. I mean, the Holocaust survivor really was the exception. I mean, I don't think she was like the perfect victim, but she wasn't such a dick either. And I guess the girl at the beginning who was in the bridal party, a friend of the bride, who had a scar on her face that impacted her life because of, societal norms about beauty. She wasn't a dick, but also I found her to be a bit grating at times. But anyway, beyond all of that, actually, the character I had the most trouble with at the end was the mother of the bride. Maybe because she was the most normal. Everything about her was pretty generic or stereotypical, ruminating on what it was like to be someone whose life, well, I guess she's a bit like GITEL from the first book. Her life was defined by caretaking others, and now she's gotten to a point where all her kids are out of the house, and she's trying to, get through, redefine herself. What's she going to do next with her life when all of her life was dedicated to them. But at the same time, her aunt was the Holocaust survivor, and the final segment of the story had a very dramatic, climactic ending for the aunt, and she didn't even mention the aunt at all. So it almost felt like Weisman submitted like an earlier draft of the mother that didn't fit with the rest of the story anymore. That was pretty jolting. I wonder if I should give this a slightly less good review on Goodreads than I've given it 4 stars, in part because I'd given everything else 3 or 5 and it felt extreme, and I really did like the writing in this until for the most part until we got to the ending where it felt like suddenly we were in 2 different stories or something. I don't know, so I'll have to think about that. But this isn't all that popular, I think, out in the world, but I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. And the final book I read this month might be my favorite. Either this or the Angela Buchdahl memoir. I'll have to duke it out in my head. But anyway, this is Foreign Seed by Allison Alsup, which I read for this month's Buzzwordathon cover pick. This is historical fiction based on reality, and we're going to a time and place that I don't usually go to, and the novelty might have helped with this story, but I think everything else about this story was really firing on all cylinders too. Anyway, we are going to China in 1918, where Samuel Sakobin is the recently promoted vice consul in the U.S. there, and his first major crisis that's kind of put on his desk is that an American citizen, Frank Meyer, fell off of a boat in travel, and his body has disappeared, and they have to, they're trying to figure out what happened to him and, do next steps. And it's a particularly fraught time for Sakobin himself. He has some anxieties about the job, but also this is World War I. His brother was sort of a cocky airsman, and one who was serving in France, and one night he takes off for a mission and he never comes back, and so he's missing. And so obviously there's a correlation here between Meyer and the brother. Also, all of these characters at least are Jewish or perceived to be Jewish, in a time where being Jewish is like socially more awkward for the rest of America. So anyway, Sakobin has to go track, down what happened, and he actually uses a new interpreter, a Chinese interpreter, Mr. Lin, who really is able to help crack the case by doing the shocking thing of talking to the servants who get, the gossip that maybe Sakobin never would have gotten on his own about a body that was pulled ashore at a nearby town. So we're following them as they're discovering the body. Sokoban is, remembers meeting Meyer in the past and, has pegged him, and the U.S. has pegged him as, a fellow congregant, a Jew. So he actually secretly brings his father's talus and kippah to bury this Jewish man in, and it almost seems like perhaps it's also metaphorical, like if he could never bury his brother, he could at least bury this other adventurous Jewish guy. Meyer, who was actually a real character, a real person from history that I'll link to down below, he worked for the U.S. government in searching down foreign seeds and had a huge impact on sort of ecology and things that, aren't necessarily central to this book. The foreign seeds. In this book, it has more of a metaphorical thing about people who are sort of foreign to their situations, but he was an adventurous type, and it was strange that, he fell off of a boat, and so there is a little bit of a mystery part of this book of unfurling what actually happened to him. But by and large, it is a character study, and it's Sokoban's book. He is the main character, and he's dealing with, the grief and of letting go of his brother, or if he should let go of his brother, who is still missing in action, and where he is in his life otherwise. There's a subplot that I guess worked okay for me, where he had broken it off with this nurse who was in China, Meredith, and he has to tie off loose ends there. And then he's actually getting closer to Mr. Lin, who also has a brother serving in France, so obviously they have some connections as well. So I just thought it was a really thoughtful, ruminative book that reminded me of how the human condition, endures, and there's so much here that's relatable, even, over a century later, about not, how horrible war is, and how it is to navigate different cultures, and also what it's like to make connections with people and try to, move on from tragedies. There's just a lot in here. I think I'm going to be sending this one home to see if my mother or sister might want to read it, but I think for Buzzwordathon, I'd been reading a lot of sort of more lighthearted fare that wasn't really doing it for me. I think this might be my first book from Buzzwordathon this year that I've really enjoyed. So, so that makes me feel good, especially as we reach the midpoint of the year, and I'm happy to, give more 5 stars to books as we move forward. And that about covers it for me now. Seems like my battery is still here for however long. Huzzah! So anyway, I still have a lot to do to wrap up this month. I'm, finishing up my literary newsletter and my reviews for Goodreads, but I should be next on this channel to give my thoughts on the BookTube Prize quarterfinals now that Robert has officially announced the semifinals pairings, and we're into the semifinals now. So time keeps marching forward. We're now also into the second part of the 2026 BookTube Prize. What do you know? So I hope you enjoyed your reading for May, whether you were reading for prizes or readathons or what have you. I'd love to hear about it. And thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.